Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out the small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to the big improvements and revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot.
And today, as I am each and every month, I'm joined by Craig Joseph. He's the Chief Medical Officer at Nordic Consulting Partners, and we're talking this month's episode on September of News You Can Use. Craig, thanks for joining me.
It's always a pleasure.
I don't believe that for one second, but okay, I'll take that compliment for now. Thank you.
But you told me I always have to say that. I'm confused now.
You mean for all the money that I pay you for doing this?
Correct.
So we're, as usual, we kick off with COVID-19. We don't seem to have emerged, although I did see something just recently that talked about the end of the pandemic. That might have come from the WHO, but given that we're talking about those folks, maybe the first thing to talk about is the Lancets publication. So it was a commission. That always reminds me of royalty and royal commissions and stuff. So I'm not quite sure how the Lancet comes to this commission, but their review of COVID-19 and the worldwide response. And I'm going to quote from their graphic, no less.
Wait, let me guess before you go. We, period, did, period, great, period.
Unfortunately, not.
Oh, all right.
It was. I want to say I'm not sure that it was titled this. It was just the Lancet Commission, but they actually produced an infographic, and it said COVID-19 response, a massive global failure. And what did they come up with? Well, they did a comprehensive investigation analysis into the COVID responses worldwide, and looked at practical steps to control and understand the pandemic, investments in strengthening defense against these infectious agents in countries, and looking at the multilateralism that tried to integrate the globe and get everybody to work together. Pretty much we failed across the world. No surprise there, I guess.
Sadly, no. One had hoped that maybe other countries had done better than we had, and I think they have in certain areas. But looking at some of the key findings of this Lancet commission, a big word that I see over and over was coordination or lack thereof. There certainly here in the U.S., we saw a significant lack of coordination between the federal government and the states, but also a failure to coordinate among all of the major countries of the world, and couldn't really agree on definition. The Lancet thought that the World Health Organization was too cautious and too slow at the very beginning to say how serious this was, and to really try to get everyone's attention by jumping up and down on our chests, which they didn't do until it was clear that that needed to happen.
Yeah, I do remember that point in time, and I guess it's difficult to call that at the right moment. Maybe, with more insight, and obviously I certainly didn't have the data. I was being fed what was, delivered to my screen, but my recollection of that was, a certain amount of, I don't want to say dismissiveness, but certainly not an attention to it that said, gosh, we should, this is a serious event. It was, well, there's something going on over there, but, we've seen this before, maybe not as serious. As you look around the world, I certainly have standouts in terms of response. And, I'm not necessarily in favor of some of the responses, and, some weren't practical. Let's pick New Zealand as an example, and Australia, because they have very similar responses, but I wouldn't put them in the same category in terms of how well they did. What were your thoughts?
Well, I think it's, the more we learn, seemingly the less we know sometimes. I think it's confusing. It's confusing to look across the country, and you see again, I think it's played out. You don't really have to look outside the U.S. You have certain states that were very aggressive in shutting down and doing other kinds of public health interventions, just like you do certain countries that were very aggressive. Some of the countries are islands, and they're able to really control who comes in and who leaves. And some of the data seem to indicate that one group did better than the other, but there are always other ways of looking at some of those data points or different points altogether. So I think this is going to be, we're continuing to learn, and we've talked about this on this show before, where people are accused of making up things when in fact it's just confusing, and you're reacting to the data that you have in front of you. And I still think we're in it, right? We're not. I haven't really heard very many people say that this pandemic is behind us. We hope it is. Certainly, we're much better prepared now than we were 2 years ago for anything. But
do you actually think that's true? Because I'm not sure I believe that.
Well, we have medications, we have vaccines. From that standpoint, we're better prepared.
So we're better prepared for COVID, but not for the next thing.
100% agree with you, sadly, on that. Yeah, we're not prepared for the next thing, and we're also potentially not that prepared for the next COVID thing, whatever that is. One can imagine some sort of strange mutation that we're not really ready for. That instead of the minor movements where the vaccine doesn't work as well, but it still functions at a more basic level. We're not, and I think monkeypox showed us how poorly prepared we were for the next virus that comes over and looks different and acts different, and to which most of us have never been exposed. So we're humans don't seem to learn lessons very quickly, and sometimes not at all. And certainly we don't seem to want to put the money or the time or the investment into public health. And so when will the next pandemic come? And will it be 10 years from now, or a century from now, or next week? We don't know, but I don't think we've written the final word on COVID, and we'll certainly be learning lessons, especially from long COVID, I think, in the decades to come.
Yeah, so one of the things you brought out, and I think it's tied to me in the public health. So the foundation of this, if we were to really learn from the experience and try and turn this into a positive experience for the future and say, this is how we might respond in the future, it was coordination. And the coordination, in my mind, would be founded on data and open data sharing, which I think, did not see. Certainly across states, even, I'm not sure, not internationally. I think we saw that sort of wide variation. There was a flip. I don't know if you recall this. It was brought home to me because I had a friend who drove from New York down to Florida in the very early days. And this was the time when New York had very bad outbreaks, and Florida had instituted border entry requirements and giving all people that crossed into Florida a requirement to go into quarantine, to sign off that they would go into quarantine. And as I think about how things developed into the future, it was kind of ironic that was the case, and maybe that would have happened the other way around, but it certainly didn't. We sort of struggle with that. But I would say that let's focus on the data and actually the sharing of that, open sharing for the benefit of everybody. Do you think that's possible, or are we just too politicized, too international challenged to be able to achieve that?
Well, I suspect it's never. Let's see. You asked a very nuanced question, so let me give you a nuanced answer. No, I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's possible because of the way we react. Right. So how do we react when we find out that there's a novel virus in China, right? We shut down our borders with China, as does everyone else. And that's that first instinct, which I fully understand and probably will support the next time it happens. That incentivizes countries, be it China or the U.S. or any other country, to minimize, right? Why would we want to tell you exactly what's going on if it's not good, when the reward for being transparent is punishment? The reward is a lack of trade and lots of other problems that happen. And so there are disincentives to sharing data, especially at the beginning, and we really have to overcome those, either by making sure that we go out of our way not to punish people for doing, or countries for doing what we want them to do, or making it so it's very difficult to do. So if you had monitors, or if you had other sorts of international equipment that couldn't be suppressed or messed with, perhaps something like that would also help. But boy, oh boy, when the incentives are to not share, it's not shocking that we don't share.
Yeah, I think important point, and it reminds me of our conversation about the nurse that was prosecuted, for the error that was made in the drug that was given to the patient, and specifically around errors. When you go after people, you lose the trust element, and people stop reporting, which was the reason that the airline industry really tried to focus on root cause analysis without apportioning blame, albeit imperfectly. For those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Today I'm talking to Dr. Craig Joseph, the Chief Medical Officer at Nordic Consulting Partners. We're covering September's news you can use. We were just talking about the Lancet Commission, its damning report, unfortunately, and thankfully, Craig gave us a nuanced response to that particular question. As we think about, moving forward, we're still in an era of dealing with COVID, or at least that virus. Have you had your booster yet? Booster. I'm not even sure how to describe this, but I think there is a new round of vaccination that's available. People are talking about it, the bivalent. Have you had yours?
I have not had my bivalent yet. I've had 4. It is very confusing talking about boosters. So I've decided I'm just going to tell you how many I've had. So I've had 4, but I have not had the bivalent one just yet. I'm well on my way. I just haven't gotten around to it. Of course, there's the controversy about the flu vaccine as well. I'm not sure it's a controversy whether you should get it at the same time. Where do you stand? Have you had the vaccines yet?
Yeah, so I as I think I shared, I endured a bout of this, and I'm pretty hot on this in terms of getting covered. I do recognize that there is some timing, because there is some drop off in terms of the immunity. So, whether you get it too early, this has also been true of the flu vaccine, but there's also just a pure function. And I happen to be scheduled for my booster. I think that would have been number 4 for me. Literally, I got COVID 3 days before I was scheduled for it. So I guess I'm a little bit ahead of the curve, and I did have it this week. And since I have 2 arms, I had both. I had my flu vaccine and my COVID-19 bivalent jab, and one on each side. And for me, it was entirely unproblematic. I had a little bit of a sore arm, nothing else to speak of.
And did you have 2 people give you shots at the exact same time? I've seen pictures of those. That's what I would have wanted, but I suspect you didn't get that.
No, and so here's the interesting thing about vaccination. And I typically, we go as a family. It's a family that vaccinates together stays together. I don't know if that's true, but for me, it's a little bit of pulling Not that there's a lack of willingness to get vaccinated. It's a very unpleasant experience. I think especially for women who have less flesh and musculature, so getting a vaccine can be a little bit harder. And in fact, my wife has had some pretty miserable experiences. I know some of these folks have hit bone, which is entirely inappropriate. I just have to tell you. But we actually had a very good, very adept individual, and I have to say, I've had lots of these. Probably I counted it up. Somebody challenged me and said, that's just not possible. But I'd had many vaccinations by the time I'd hit 6 or 7, because I lived overseas. I had to have yellow fever all the time because we lived in yellow fever endemic areas. And this particular individual was outstanding. I didn't even feel the needle go in, and I didn't feel the distribution. Sometimes you get a stinging. It was a out and out, hands down, one of the best experiences, and that's a function of the operator. I know I've seen a few robots doing this. I'm not sure I'd be too excited about an Arnie Schwarzenegger lookalike coming at me with the needle quite yet, but I have seen them where they pin you down because they don't want you to move when this thing swings into action.
Now I'm picturing Arnold coming at me with a syringe and a needle, and you said you didn't want an Arnold Schwarzenegger lookalike, but I don't think I want Arnold Schwarzenegger himself either coming at me with the needle and syringe. So which one was more painful the next day?
So only one I had pain in, and that was the bivalent, and it was very mild for me. The flu was, I didn't even feel any pain, and had almost, I would say I had no symptoms. My wife had a little bit. She had, clearly her immune system reacting. And as I said to her, I felt like I got COVID worse than she did. So I think my immune system said, seen this before, no problem.
Fair enough. Well, I think that's, I think it's good advice. It will be interesting to see who or how the pickup is in the United States for both the booster and for the flu shot. There have been some predictions that this is going to be a pretty severe flu season based on how it happened in the Southern Hemisphere. They go before us, and so if we can take what happened in the Southern Hemisphere to be predictive of what's going to happen in the Northern Hemisphere, there are going to be a lot of sick people, and from the flu. Forget about COVID, just strictly from the flu. So I certainly will be.
I'm going to counter that and say,
please,
we go before them.
You're right. Since in the North America is, as we all know, on top of the world.
Well, it is the center of the universe.
Because when you look at the globe, clearly North America is on top and South America is below. So you're right. We do go first, and I clearly misspoke and apologize for that.
No. I'm teasing. One year I was down in Australia, and I decided to get my flu vaccination whilst I was there because they were at the tail end, and I got whatever it was that they were offering. Some of my colleagues from medical school actually live and work there, and I got one of them to sign off and get me vaccinated. I don't remember how it worked out. I mean, for the most part, I didn't when I was in my sort of relative youth, but I've been pretty consistent. I think it's just smart. I'd rather not get the sickness, quite honestly. So I hope people do, but I'm not encouraged with the way that things are. But I certainly did, and I know you obviously will. So
I will, and we should remind everyone that just like the COVID shot, just with the flu shot, the goal is not to prevent illness. That would be nice, and that sometimes happens. The goal is to prevent serious repercussions from the illness. So the goal is that not necessarily that you won't get the flu, but if you do get the flu, your chances of ending up in the emergency department or in the hospital or in the ICU are much less. And much like it's the same with COVID. So again, people should go in with understanding that, and then the expectations are appropriately set.
Yeah, we were a little bit spoiled with the COVID vaccines. I think we saw some incredible rates, and I've seen a lot of interest in some of the output of possible vaccines using that particular platform that I think will be much improved, including, I think, some early work on the malaria vaccine, which, that would be astounding because that still kills about 4 million people a year worldwide. So in the news, I think CVS bought Signify, I think, Signify Health, which is, clinicians that provide in-person evaluations. The article I read said CVS is bringing back physician house calls, which, what's old is new. I've long been a believer that, there's tremendous value in that. You think that's a realistic economic potential opportunity?
I think it's, first of all, I would agree with you on what you just said in terms of the benefits. And I think we've seen some of those benefits even virtually, right? So the opportunity for physicians to see in your house, see what's behind you, see how you're interacting with the people that are around you outside of their office is exceedingly helpful. So house calls would benefit. You get you'd be able to see their house and some of the gain some understanding into how they live, but you would also be able to physically examine them, which you can't do in a virtual visit. So huge benefits. Is it going to be something that we see commonly? I still suspect not, because it's going to be very expensive to send physicians out to the house. Now, to send physician extenders, to send nurses and others who are specially trained to kind of do most of that reconnaissance work, and then potentially bring in some physicians, or more likely refer you to where the physicians are, often in their hospital or in their clinic. That seems to be a big, lots of potential there. And I don't think this is anything that has never been tried before. I think it's much more common in Europe. I've seen videos of nurses going out in England and routinely kind of doing assessments that in the U.S. we make people come in for. So certainly we're not breaking any new ground here, but I do think it's exciting. And again, as things change, the more they change, the more they stay the same. Who would have thought that a drugstore chain would be interested in coming to your house with a doctor or a nurse like that? That is pretty. I think 10 years ago that would have been fairly shocking.
Yeah, I'm always been a big fan of the home visit. I grew up in a country that had it. My brother was a GP. He was doing home visits right up until the point that he retired. Maybe not as many, but it was a fundamental part of his daily practice. He would get a list at the end of running surgery, as they called it. It wasn't surgery, but that's how they referred to, the appointments. And then he would go out on his rounds visiting. And indeed, there were probably regulars. And in fact, my wife was a nurse midwife health visitor. And she was part of the community system at one point. For every mother that had a baby, I don't know that this is still true. I think we've lost a lot of this. They would receive a community midwife visit daily for the first 14 days. And, that might sound excessive, but you know what? That is such a stressful time. Even a husband and wife like us, physician, nurse, midwife, health visitor, we felt incredibly inept when that first baby arrived, despite knowing all the things that we did scientifically seemed to have no contribution. It was a huge positive. And I think, your point is exactly right. Seeing that setting, even virtualized, I think has tremendous value. And I hope we see a big return of that. I really do. But The economics of it have to be worked out. So maybe it's that physician extenders, but hooray for that. Unfortunately, as we do each week, we've run out of time. So just remains for me to thank you for joining me on the show. As usual, Craig, thanks for joining me.
It's been fun. Can't wait till next month.
Thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, The Incrementalist, or share with me at DrNick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com, and tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.